The gravel crunched under Alan Rourke's boots as he stepped out of his pickup truck. October wind cut through Claiborne like a blade, sending dead leaves skittering across Lorraine Whitlock's front yard. The lawn needed mowing had needed it for weeks. Weeds choked the flower beds his wife Jean used to tend back when she cared about things like appearances and family pride. Alan pulled his jacket tighter and studied the house. Paint peeled from the shutters. The front steps sagged under the weight of neglect. This wasn't the home he remembered from their early marriage, when Jean would drag him here for Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. Something felt wrong. Had felt wrong for days now. Jean's just helping her mother, he muttered to the empty yard, but his gut disagreed. 20 years in the Army had taught him to trust his instincts. 6 years of marriage had taught him to read his wife's moods. The past month, she'd been different. Distant, picking fights over nothing, snapping at Eli for breathing too loud, making excuses to leave the house at odd hours. The changes started small. Jean sleeping on the couch instead of their bed. Her phone always face down on the counter. New clothes appearing in her closet, clothes he'd never seen her wear. When he asked about them, she'd snap that he never paid attention anyway. Then came the bombshell last Tuesday morning. Eli needs space from your military crap, she'd said while packing his son's clothes into a suitcase. All that discipline and structure. It's not healthy for a kid. He's staying at mom's for a while. Space. From his own father. Alan had stood in their kitchen, coffee mug in hand, watching his wife pack up their child like he was going to summer camp. Except summer camp didn't require a week's worth of clothes and his favorite stuffed elephant. How long is a while? Alan had asked, until you figure out how to be a better father. The accusation hit like a slap. Alan worked overtime at the garage to keep food on their table and a roof over their heads. He coached Eli's little league team on weekends. Read bedtime stories every night he was home. What exactly made him a bad father? But Jean was already loading Eli in her car, avoiding his questions with the skill of someone who'd practiced the conversation in her head. Alan knocked on the peeling white door. 3 sharp raps that echoed in the empty afternoon air. No answer. He checked his watch. 3:30. Jean had said she'd be here with Eli after school, that he waited, then knocked again. Still nothing. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic on Highway 62. Mrs. Patterson's dog barked once from across the street, then fell silent. Even the October wind seemed to hold its breath. Alan tried the doorknob. It turned easily in his hand. The front door stood unlocked. His training kicked in immediately. 20 years in the Army had drilled certain responses into his DNA. Unknown situation equals maximum caution. He entered slow and quiet, every sense alert, his body automatically shifting into the careful movement patterns that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. The house felt wrong the moment he stepped inside. The air was thick and stale, like windows that hadn't been open in weeks. The living room was darker than it should be at this time of day. Curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun, but it was the smell that made his stomach turn. Stale wine. Yes, Lorraine had always been fond of her afternoon glass. But underneath, that was something else. Something animal and musty that seemed to cling to the furniture and walls. Dog hair. Lots of it. But Lorraine didn't own a dog. Never had, as far as Alan knew. She'd always claimed to be allergic. Hello, Alan called. Jean? Eli. Silence stretched through the cramped living room. Then he heard it. A soft whimpering from deeper in the house. Alan moved toward the sound, his work boots silent on the worn carpet. The whimpering grew louder. Desperate. A child's voice. Daddy. The word hit Alan like a punch to the chest. He rounded the corner into the main living room and stopped dead. The rusted metal kennel sat against the far wall like an obscene piece of furniture. 3 feet by 4 feet, maybe big enough for a German Shepherd or a Golden Retriever. Not big enough for a 5-year-old boy. But there Eli was, knees pulled tight to his chest, tear-stained face pressed against the cold metal bars. His Star Wars pajamas, the ones with Darth Vader on the chest that he'd begged for at Christmas, were dirty and wrinkled. His hair stuck up in all directions like he'd been sleeping on concrete. Dark circles ringed his eyes. The sight hit Alan with the force of a physical blow. His vision tunneled, the edges going red, then crystal clear with the kind of focus that came only in moments of absolute crisis. Daddy. Eli's small voice cracked as he reached through the bars with desperate fingers. You came. I knew you'd come. Alan's legs moved without conscious thought, carrying him across the room. He knelt beside the cage, his hands steady despite the rage boiling in his chest like molten steel. Every instinct screamed at him to rip the kennel apart with his bare hands, but Eli needed him calm, needed him focused. I'm here, buddy. Alan kept his voice soft and steady, the same tone he'd used to talk his son through thunderstorms and bad dreams. Daddy's here. You're safe now. I was so scared. Eli's bottom lip trembled. She said you might not come. She said you might not want me anymore. The words were like knives twisting in Alan's chest. Who said that? Mom. She said I was too much trouble. Said maybe you'd be happier without me. Alan's hands clenched into fists before he forced them to relax. Not now. Stay calm. Get Eli out first. Deal with Jean later. Mom says I gotta live in here now. Eli's voice was small and broken, the voice of a child whose world had been turned upside down. She says I have to atone for letting the dog out. But Daddy, there wasn't no dog. I looked everywhere. I asked Grandma where the dog was, and she just laughed. Alan pulled his pocket knife from his belt, a 4-inch buck knife he'd carried since his Army days. The lock on the kennel was cheap hardware store junk, the kind of thing meant to keep pets from opening their cages, not to actually secure anything. 30 seconds of careful work with the blade, and the lock clicked open with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. Eli tumbled into his father's arms, small body, shaking with relief and exhaustion. Alan held him tight, one hand on his back, the other stroking his tangled hair. It's okay, Alan whispered into his son's ear. You're safe now. Nobody's ever going to put you in a cage again. I promise. I was good, Daddy. I promise I was good. I didn't do nothing wrong. I know you were good. You're always good. She said I was bad. Said I needed to learn respect. You don't need to learn anything except that your dad loves you. Alan looked around the room while he held his son. The details painted a picture that made his stomach turn. Empty wine bottles lined the coffee table, not just one or two, but a dozen or more. Cigarette butts overflowed every ashtray. Food containers from fast food restaurants were stacked on every surface, some with food still rotting inside. The smell of neglect hung thick in the air, mixing with something else. Something that spoke of fear and desperation and a child who'd been left alone for too long in a place where no child should ever be. And in the corner, barely visible in the dim light, was a water bowl, the kind made for dogs. It was half empty and had clearly been there for days that Alan's vision went red again, and no sign of Jean anywhere. Where's your mom, Eli? She left yesterday morning, with a man who smells like beer and talks loud. Eli wiped his nose on his pajama sleeve. They were laughing about something. Mom packed a big suitcase. Alan's jaw tightened. Reed Mallory. Had to be. The man owned Murphy's bar on Main Street and had been sniffing around Jean for months. Alan had noticed the way Reed looked at his wife during the few times they'd crossed paths in town. The way Jean's cheeks would flush when Reed's name came up in conversation. Has she done this before? Put you in the cage. Eli nodded against his father's shoulder, the movement so small Alan almost missed it. 3 times. The first time was just for an hour. She said it was to teach me about staying in the yard. But then it got longer. How much longer? Yesterday, I was in there from breakfast until dinner time. Grandma brought me crackers and water, but she wouldn't let me out. Said I had to learn my lesson proper. The rage in Alan's chest burned hotter. Did they hurt you any other way? No hitting. Just. Eli struggled to find the words. Just scared. Real scared. And cold. The floor's cold, and there's no blankets in there. Alan stood, lifting Eli with him. His son weighed nothing, felt fragile as bird bones in his arms. When was the last time the boy had eaten a real meal? The front stairs creaked overhead. Heavy footsteps moving across the second floor. Someone was coming down, taking their time, making no effort to be quiet. That's Grandma, Eli whispered. She gets mean when she drinks the purple wine. Alan set Eli behind him, positioning himself between his son and whoever was coming down those stairs. His body automatically shifted into a defensive stance, weight balanced, hands ready. 20 years of training didn't just disappear because you hung up the uniform. Lorraine Whitlock appeared in the living room doorway, like a specter from a bad dream. Silk robe that had seen better days, wine glass in one manicured hand, lipstick smeared across her thin lips like a wound. Her gray hair was disheveled, standing up at odd angles as if she'd just woken from a nap. She looked at Alan and Eli without a trace of shame or surprise, as if finding a man rescuing his son from a dog cage was the most normal thing in the world. "You're early," she said, her words slightly slurred. The wine glass was half empty, and from a flush in her cheeks, it wasn't her first of the day. "Am I?" Alan kept his voice level controlled. Behind him, he felt Eli press closer, small hands gripping the back of his jacket. "When exactly was the right time to find my son locked in a dog cage?" Lorraine sipped her wine with deliberate slowness, making a show of savoring the taste. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Alan. It's not like he was hurt. Not hurt." Alan gestured toward the kennel. "You locked a 5-year-old child in a metal cage. I gave him time to think about his behavior. Something you clearly never bothered to do. What behavior? What could a 5-year-old possibly do to deserve this?" Lorraine waved her wine glass dismissively, sloshing purple liquid onto her robe. "He needs discipline, Alan. Real discipline. Maybe a few days and there will teach him to respect people's property. A few days, however long it takes. Children today don't understand consequences. They need to learn that actions have results." Alan felt his control slipping. The military bearing that had kept him alive in combat zones was cracking under the weight of what this woman had done to his son. Whose property? The Hendersons next door? He squeezed through a gap in their fence and wandered into their yard yesterday morning. Could have been hurt. Could have gotten into their pool and drowned. So you locked him in a cage. It's called consequences. Lorraine's voice held no apology, no recognition that anything she'd done was wrong. If anything, she sounded proud of her methods. Something you never taught him. Too busy playing soldier to actually parent your own child. The insult hit its mark. Alan had missed birthdays during his deployments, missed Christmas mornings and Little League games and parent-teacher conferences. The guilt was a constant weight he carried, a voice that whispered he wasn't good enough, wasn't present enough, wasn't the father Eli deserved. But that guilt didn't justify this. Nothing justified this. Alan felt Eli's small hand grip his jacket. His son was shaking. "We're leaving," Alan said. "Fine. Take him. Jean will be back tomorrow anyway." "Will she?" Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Alan reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He sat on the coffee table next to the empty wine bottles. "Read it when you sober up." He lifted Eli and headed for the door. "What is this?" Lorraine called after him. Alan stopped in the doorway. "Text messages. Between your daughter and Reed Mallory. Discussing how to get Eli out of the way so no one finds out about their little arrangement." The wine glass slipped from Lorraine's hand and shattered on the floor. Alan carried Eli outside into the cold October air. His son buried his face in his neck. "Are we going home, Daddy?" "Not yet, buddy. We're going to Aunt Janelle's first." "Why?" Alan buckled Eli into his car seat and started the engine. "Because sometimes grown-ups need to answer for what they've done." Janelle Rohr Thompson lived 20 minutes outside Claiborne in a white farmhouse with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that spoke of better times and simpler values. The kind of house where children ran through sprinklers in summer and built snowmen in winter, where family dinners happened around a table instead of in front of a television. Alan's sister met them at the door before he could knock, as if she'd been watching for his truck through the front window. "I saw your headlights in the driveway." Her eyes immediately went to Eli's dirty pajamas and the hollow look in his small face. "Jesus, Alan, what happened to him? Can we come in?" "It's cold." Janelle stepped aside without another word, her social worker instincts already cataloging the signs of trauma she could see in her nephew. The way he clung to his father's jacket, the dark circles under his eyes, the way he flinched when she moved too quickly. Her living room was everything Lorraine's wasn't. Warm and clean and filled with the comfortable chaos of a normal family. Kids' toys scattered across the carpet from her own 2 daughters. Books stacked on the coffee table next to half-finished homework assignments. A fire crackling in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with family photos, This was what a home should look like. What Eli's life should have been. Alan set Eli on the couch and knelt in front of him, hands gentle on his son's narrow shoulders. "Buddy, Aunt Janelle's going to make you some hot chocolate while I talk to her in the kitchen. There's books here and toys from when your cousins were little. You remember Katie and Emma?" Eli nodded and reached for a picture book on the coffee table. "Are they coming home soon?" "They're at their dad's this weekend, but they left some things for you to play with." "Okay, Daddy." The trust in those two words broke Alan's heart. After everything he'd been through, Eli still believed his father would keep him safe. That faith was a responsibility heavier than any pack he'd carried in the army. In the kitchen. Janelle closed the door behind them and leaned against it like she was barricading them from the world. "Start talking," she said, "and don't leave anything out." Alan told her everything. The cage, the water bowl on the floor, Lorraine's casual cruelty and complete lack of remorse. The text messages he discovered 2 weeks ago while Jean slept, the ones that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it still made him sick to think about. Janelle's face grew darker with each detail. As a county social worker, she'd seen abuse cases before. Too many of them. But hearing it described in clinical terms in case files was different from seeing the results sitting in her living room, wearing Star Wars pajamas, and trying not to cry. "You have copies of those messages. Screenshots. Timestamps. Everything." Alan pulled out his phone and showed her the evidence. "Look at this one from 3 weeks ago." Janelle read the screen, her expression hardening. "She's discussing you like you're already gone. It's worse. Keep reading. More messages. Plans for after the divorce. Discussions about custody arrangements that assumed Alan would simply disappear from his son's life. References to the old man that could only mean Lorraine and her willingness to handle the kid while they figured things out. "They've been planning this for months," Janelle said. "At least that long. Maybe longer. But it's not enough. Not yet." "What do you mean?" "Jean will claim you doctored them. Lorraine will say Eli's lying. They'll close ranks. So what do I do?" Janelle turned back to him. "You document everything. Build a case they can't weasel out of. And you do it smart. I'm listening. First rule of fighting monsters, Alan. Don't become one yourself. You go in angry, you make mistakes. You make mistakes, they walk." Alan nodded. His sister was right. This wasn't combat. This was warfare. "I need to make some calls," Janelle said. "People I trust. We're going to find out exactly what your wife has been up to." 3 days later, Janelle spread documents across her kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. Each piece revealed another layer of betrayal. "Reed Mallory owes $38,000 to Danny Crenshaw," she said. "Danny runs an underground poker game out of the back room at Murphy's Pool Hall." Alan studied the betting slips and IOUs. "Where'd you get these?" "Friend at the courthouse. Reed's been borrowing against the bar. Problem is, the bar's worth maybe $15,000 on a good day. So he's desperate. Gets better." Janelle pulled out another folder. "Your wife took out a personal loan 3 weeks ago. $25,000. Use your income as collateral." "That's impossible. I never signed anything." "You did. Or someone did it for you." Janelle showed him the paperwork. His signature looked perfect. "Your mother-in-law co-signed." Alan's hands clenched into fists. "They forged my name. And here's the kicker. Guess who the loan officer was? Reed's cousin. Reed's ex-wife. Linda Mallory works at First National Bank. She processed the whole thing. The picture was getting clearer. Reed needed money fast. Jean provided access to Alan's credit. Linda made it happen." "There's more," Janelle said. "I talked to Becky Morrison from down the street. Jean's been telling neighbors you're dangerous. Claims you threaten her. Hit her. That's a lie. I know. But she's building a case. False abuse claims to win custody. Then she disappears with Reed and the loan money." Alan stood and walked to the window. Outside, Eli played with Janelle's daughters on the swing set, laughing for the first time in days. "She used our son as bait," Alan said, "to keep him quiet, lock him away until the papers were signed. And Lorraine went along with it. For a cut of the money, probably." Alan turned back to his sister. "What's our next move?" Janelle smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "We give them exactly what they want." Alan called Jean that evening from Janelle's house. Eli was upstairs watching cartoons, safely out of earshot. Hello. Jean's voice sounded cautious. It's me. Alan kept his tone neutral. We need to talk. About what? About fixing this. About our family. Silence on the other end. Then, I don't know, Alan. You've been so angry lately. I miss you. I miss us. Can we try dinner tomorrow night? At your mom's place? You want to have dinner with my mother. I want to have dinner with my wife. If Lorraine's there, fine. We're all family. Another pause. Alan could practically hear the wheels turning. Okay, Jean said finally. 7 o'clock. I'll bring wine. After Alan hung up, Janelle shook her head. You're a better actor than I gave you credit for. I had good training. Alan reached for his phone again. Now I need to call Noah. Noah Klein answered on the second ring. Rourke, haven't heard from you in months. I need a favor, Noah. A big one. Noah had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with Alan. Saved his life outside Kandahar when an IED took out their convoy. Now he wore a deputy's badge in Carlisle County. Name it. Alan explained the situation. Noah listened without interruption. So you want me to wire Lorraine's house? Can you do it legally? With probable cause for child abuse? Hell yes. When? Tomorrow afternoon. Before dinner. I'll bring the good stuff. Digital audio, motion sensors, the works. They won't know we're listening. Thanks, Noah. Thank me after we nail these bastards. The next evening, Alan arrived at Lorraine's house, carrying 2 bottles of wine and a large basket of takeout from Romano's Italian restaurant. The parking lot had been nearly empty when he'd picked up the order, just like most businesses in Claiborne on a Wednesday night. The food was still warm, filling his truck with the smell of garlic and tomatoes that should have been comforting but instead felt like part of an elaborate disguise. He'd spent the afternoon helping Noah place listening devices throughout the house. Tiny digital recorders no bigger than quarters, hidden behind picture frames and under lampshades. Motion sensors that would track movement from room to room. Equipment so sophisticated it made his old Army communications gear look like tin cans connected by string. Jean answered the door before he could knock, as if she'd been watching for him through the front window. She looked nervous but hopeful, like a woman trying to convince herself that her carefully constructed lies might actually lead to a happy ending. You came, she said, and the relief in her voice was almost convincing. I said I would. She was trying too hard, and it showed in every detail. Makeup applied with the precision of someone preparing for a performance. Hair styled to perfection despite the fact that they were just having dinner at her mother's house. She was wearing the blue dress he'd bought her last Christmas, the one she claimed to hate because it was too fancy for Claiborne. Now he understood. It wasn't that the dress was too fancy for their small town. It was that she'd been saving it for someone else. Someone who could appreciate fine things and expensive tastes in ways that a small-town mechanic never could. Where's Eli? With Janelle. I thought we should talk first. Adults only. Jean stepped aside to let him in, and he caught a whiff of perfume. Not the drugstore brand she usually wore, but something expensive. Something new. Smart thinking. She led him to the dining room, where Lorraine sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court. She was already working on her first glass of wine, though by the flush in her cheeks and the slight sway in her posture, it probably wasn't her first drink of the day. Alan, she said without warmth, raising her glass in a mock toast. How nice of you to join us. Lorraine. He set the wine on the table with careful precision. You look well. I've been better. This whole situation has been very stressful. Alan pulled out Jean's chair for her, playing the part of the reconciling husband with the skill of someone who'd learned to adapt to any situation. Jean watched him like he might explode at any moment, her eyes tracking his every movement with the wariness of someone who knew she was walking through a minefield. They sat down to eat, and Alan served the food with practiced efficiency. Chicken Parmesan for Jean, her favorite. Lasagna for Lorraine, heavy on the cheese, just the way she liked it. He poured the wine with the careful attention of a sommelier, making sure everyone's glass was full before taking a sip of his own. The first few minutes passed in awkward silence, broken only by the clink of silverware against plates and the occasional sound of Lorraine's wine glass being set down a little too hard on the wooden table. So, Alan said after a few bites of pasta, his voice conversational and relaxed, Eli seems happy at Janelle's. He's a resilient child, Lorraine said, cutting her lasagna with surgical precision. Children bounce back quickly from adversity. Has to be, I guess. After what he's been through. Jean's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. A piece of chicken balanced precariously on the tines. What do you mean? The cage, Jean. Finding him locked up like an animal. That was just. Jean looked at her mother for support, her carefully applied makeup doing nothing to hide the panic that flashed across her face. We had to teach him. Teach him what? Respect, Lorraine interrupted, leaning back in her chair with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged on her methods. Boundaries. The difference between right and wrong. In a dog cage. Sometimes traditional discipline isn't enough. Sometimes children need to understand consequences in a more direct way. Lorraine's whine was loosening her tongue, making her bolder, more willing to defend the indefensible. It worked, didn't it? A few hours in there, and he stopped wandering off. Hours, sometimes longer. Depends on how long it takes for the lesson to sink in. Lorraine laughed, the sound sharp and ugly in the quiet dining room. You should have seen him curl up like a little puppy. Almost cute, in a pathetic sort of way. Alan gripped his wine glass to keep his hand steady. Every word was being recorded by the hidden microphones. Every casual admission of cruelty was building a case that would be impossible to defend against. I wish you'd told me, he said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. About the discipline issues. Maybe I could have helped. You were never around to help, Jean said, finding her voice again. Always working on cars. Always too busy for your own family. Is that why you found someone else? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Jean's face went white, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking like war paint smeared by sweat and fear. What? Reed Mallory. Nice guy, according to what I hear. Smells like beer, according to Eli. I don't know what. Jean, honey, Lorraine interrupted, waving her wine glass with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd had too much to drink and too little sense. He knows. We might as well be honest. Jean stared at her mother in horror. Mom, no. Why not? Reed's a good man. Better than this one. Lorraine gestured at Alan with her wine glass, sloshing purple liquid onto the white tablecloth. At least Reed knows how to have fun. At least he knows how to treat a woman like she deserves to be treated. And he doesn't hate kids, Jean said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Exactly. Lorraine's voice rose with enthusiasm, as if she was discussing the weather instead of conspiracy to commit fraud. Reed hates kids. That's why this arrangement works so well. You get Reed, I get to help raise Eli properly, and Alan here gets to move on with his life. What arrangement? Alan asked, though he already knew the answer. Lorraine smiled with the satisfaction of someone who thought she'd outsmarted everyone in the room. Oh, Alan, you really don't get it, do you? Jean's filing for divorce next week. She'll get custody, of course. Who's going to believe a man who abandons his son? I never abandoned. You will, when the abuse charges come out. When Jean tells everyone how you threatened her, how you hit her, how you came home drunk and violent and made her fear for her life. I never laid a hand on Jean. Your word against hers. Lorraine took another sip of wine, savoring both the alcohol and what she thought was her moment of triumph. And a mother's word always wins in custody court, especially when the mother has witnesses. Witnesses, neighbors who've seen the bruises, friends who've heard Jean crying on the phone, people who care about what happens to innocent children. Alan nodded slowly, as if he was finally understanding the scope of their plan. Smart strategy. Get Eli out of the way so he can't contradict the story. Exactly. Can't have a 5-year-old running around telling people his mommy and daddy never fight. And the money. The question seemed to catch both women off guard. Jean and Lorraine exchanged glances across the table, and Alan could practically see the wheels turning as they tried to figure out how much he knew. What money? Jean said, but her voice lacked conviction. The loan. $25,000. In my name. Lorraine's smile faltered for the first time since he'd arrived. How did you? I know about the forgery, Lorraine. My signature on papers I never saw. Documents I never signed. That's ridiculous, Jean said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. You signed those papers yourself. When? Last month. You were drunk. You don't remember. I haven't been drunk in 3 years. Your word against mine. Alan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder. The device was no bigger than a deck of cards, with a red light that glowed softly in the dining room's dim lighting. He set it on the table between the wine bottles and pressed play. Jean's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. Reed hates kids. That's why this arrangement works so well. You get Reed, I get to help raise Eli properly, and Alan here gets to move on with his life. The blood drained from Jean's face as she stared at the recorder like it was a venomous snake coiled to strike. You recorded us. Still recording. Lorraine slammed her wine glass down on the table hard enough to crack the stem. You sneaky bastard. Takes one to know one. You can't use that. It's illegal. Actually, it's not. Alan's voice remained calm and conversational, as if he was discussing the weather instead of destroying their lives. Kentucky's a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows about the recording, it's admissible in court. I can't wait for Alan to be gone, so we can be free. Jean's recorded voice continued from the device. Alan clicked it off and looked at both women with the patience of someone who held all the cards. Want to hear more? I've got hours of material. Jean stared at the recorder like it was a snake. Alan, please. We can work this out. Can we? Alan refilled his wine glass. I don't think so. Whatever Jean did, we can fix it, Lorraine said. Family sticks together. Family. Alan savored the word. That's interesting, Lorraine, because I've been thinking about family a lot lately. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a legal document. This house. How long have you lived here? 32 years, Lorraine said. Since Jean's father died. And you own it free and clear. Of course Lorraine stopped. Why? Well, that's the funny thing about loan documents. When you co-sign using someone else's income as collateral, the bank needs real security. Something they can actually seize if the loan goes bad. Alan spread the papers across the table. This house isn't yours anymore, Lorraine. What? 3 months ago, when I noticed some irregularities in our finances, I moved all our joint marital assets into a trust. My name only, including this house. That's impossible. Jean transferred the deed to me as a wedding gift. Remember? 6 years ago. What's mine is yours, she said. Lorraine grabbed the papers with shaking hands. This can't be legal. Oh, it's legal. And since you used this house as collateral for a fraudulent loan, a loan taken out without the actual property owner's consent, the bank has already approved foreclosure proceedings. No, you have 30 days. Maybe less. Jean stood up so fast her chair fell over. You can't do this. I already did. This is our home. Was your home. Past tense. Lorraine looked at the papers again, her face gray. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my problem. You're destroying us. No, Lorraine. You destroyed yourselves. I'm just making sure you pay for it. The front door opened. Noah Klein stepped into the dining room, followed by 2 other deputies. All 3 wore their dress uniforms and serious expressions. Evening, folks, Noah said. Sorry to interrupt dinner. What is this? Jean demanded. Official business. Noah pulled out his notebook. We've been listening to your conversation for the past hour. Very interesting stuff. Listening. Lorraine's voice cracked. You bugged my house. With a warrant. Yes, ma'am. Signed by Judge Harriman this afternoon. Noah nodded to his partners. They moved to either side of the table. Jean Rourke, you're under arrest for loan fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and child endangerment. This is ridiculous. Jean backed against the wall. I haven't done anything wrong. You forged your husband's signature on legal documents. You conspired to defraud a federally insured bank. And you locked a 5-year-old child in a dog kennel. Noah's voice was flat and professional. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. One of the deputies moved toward Jean. She looked at Alan with desperate eyes. Please, Alan, don't let them do this. I love you. No, you don't. The deputy cuffed Jean's hands behind her back. She started crying. Lorraine Whitlock, Noah continued. You're under arrest for child abuse, unlawful imprisonment of a minor, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. I'm 73 years old. Lorraine protested. You can't arrest me. Watch us. The second deputy approached Lorraine. She tried to run but stumbled over her wine glass. The deputy caught her arm and steadied her. "Easy there, ma'am. Don't make this harder than it has to be." As they cuffed Lorraine, she turned to Alan with pure hatred in her eyes. "You think you've won? You'll never see a dime of that money. Reed's probably in Mexico by now." Reed Mallory was arrested 2 hours ago at a truck stop outside Louisville, Noah said. Turns out Danny Crenshaw doesn't like being owed money. He called in some favors. Lorraine's face went white. "Anything else you'd like to confess while we're here?" Noah asked. Neither woman answered. "All right then, let's go." As the deputies led Jean and Lorraine toward the door, Jean turned back one last time. "Eli needs his mother, Alan. Don't take his mother away from him. You stop being his mother the moment you put him in that cage." The front door closed behind them. Alan was alone in the dining room with the remnants of the dinner and the weight of what he'd just done. He pulled out his phone and called Janelle. "It's over," he said when she answered. "How do you feel?" Alan looked around the empty house, at the wine stains on the carpet, at the legal papers scattered across the table. "Like I can breathe again." 6 weeks later, Alan stood in the driveway of Lorraine's foreclosed house with Eli beside him. The bank had already changed the locks. A for sale sign stood crooked in the overgrown front yard. "Is this where Grandma used to live?" Eli asked. "Yes." It looked sad. Alan squeezed his son's hand. "Houses don't have feelings, buddy. Only people do. Is Grandma coming back?" Alan knelt down to Eli's level. His son's eyes were clear now. The fear was gone. He slept through the night again, laughed during the day, started calling Alan Daddy instead of Sir. "No, son. People who lock children in cages end up in cages themselves." "What kind of cages?" "The kind with bars, where they can't hurt anyone else." Eli nodded solemnly. "Good." They walked to the front gate. Alan pulled out the chain and padlock he'd brought. He wrapped the chain through the gate posts and snapped the lock shut. The click echoed across the empty yard. "Can we go home now?" Eli asked. "Yeah, buddy, we can go home." As they drove away, Alan looked in the rearview mirror at the locked gate growing smaller behind them. Jean was awaiting trial in county jail. Bail denied due to flight risk. Lorraine sat in the cell next to her, refused bail because of the child abuse charges. They would both face years in prison. Complete financial ruin. The loss of everything they tried to steal. Perfect justice. Alan reached over and ruffled Eli's hair. His son smiled up at him with the trust of a child who knew his father would always protect him. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, son." The road ahead was clear and straight. Behind them, the cage door was finally locked on the right side.